So good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are today, and welcome to the MazeBolt webinar, How to Squeeze More Out of Your DDoS Mitigation Tools. We're going to discuss how to extend the value of your DDoS security protection tools and ensure that your online services are protected at all times. This is the first in a series of webinars that we will deep dive into this interesting and complex topic. So I'm really excited to introduce you to our two speakers who will share their experiences working in this field. Amit Morrison, who is VP Services at MazeBolt. Amit has over 20 years of experience leading technical support and professional services teams for multiple startups in the cybersecurity industry. Alon Yaffe, Solution Architect at MazeBolt, has over 15 years experience in the IT security industry and has worked with some of the very well-known cybersecurity companies such as Checkpoint, Radware, and other technology companies in technical roles. So before we get started, just some housekeeping. So we're going to be running some polling questions during the webinar. So please join in. It will be very interesting to see your views on the questions that we're going to ask during this webinar. If you have any questions, please use the QA button in the menu at the bottom of the viewing screen. We'll probably take the questions at the end of the session of the main presentation. And also just be aware that we will be sharing with you the recording of the webinar so that you can watch it on demand and of course share it with your colleagues. So I think we're ready to kick off. Let's get started. So over to you, Alon.
Thank you, Howard. So our agenda for today, first of all, is to cover in a very high aspect, what is the problem, the DDoS problem. Everyone talks about it. And when we first started to work on this webinar, we realized there's much more to talk about. This is why we decided to go to a series of webinars, and we're going to review different types of technologies and solutions and how to squeeze them more in order to get your DDoS mitigation working as much as it can. We will talk about different components in a common network deployment and how we can use each one of them to protect our network better. We're going to dedicate a special slide for firewalls, not because we have much more to say about firewalls in terms of DDoS, but because it's so important to discuss about the misconceptions and what we need to avoid. And then we're going to cover a cloud-based DDoS mitigation solution, one of them, and we're going to talk a bit about hybrid solutions. And of course, we're going to have much more technologies to discuss in the next webinars. So
Alon, maybe just before you kind of dive in, let's perhaps take a first polling question just to sort of get people, make sure people are thinking about this topic. So yeah, the first topic, we thought would be interesting to get your feedback is how often do you test DDoS protection solution? Is it once a year? Is it every 6 months? Is it every month? Or don't you know? So let's give everybody a few moments to answer. Please do that. So we will then display the results once everyone has had a chance to give an opinion, and then we'll invite Amit and Alon to give their reaction to this. Okay, we've got a few interesting answers. Either you're testing your DDoS protection once a year, every 6 months, monthly, or you don't know. All right, so let's see how the poll went and share the results. So 67% of the people here today said that they check once a year. 33% was monthly. So any thoughts on that? What's your Amit? What's your experience with customers when you start working with them? Does it tend to be once a year or monthly? What do you normally see?
So what do you see with most of our customers is customers that have some kind of awareness that they need to test. And so this is the main issue that we see with a lot of companies we meet. is that they're not even aware for the need to test. Right? There is a conception, right? A misconception, more likely, that once you acquired protection solution, these protection solutions, you are protected. But once the whole idea that we see around the problem here and what we're talking in this webinar is that it is a misconception.
Mhm.
You acquire a solution, you feel protected, but it's not always the situation. Right?
Mhm.
So that's very interesting.
Alon,
I'm
any?
assuming that the people that
Mhm.
join this webinar are already aware for the need to test their solutions, right? Otherwise, they would
Mhm.
not be here.
I totally agree with you, Amit. And we know that you need to test your DDoS mitigation solutions all the time, not stop in that process, because networks are changing all the time. New applications come into the picture. IP addresses are being changed sometimes. You need to make sure those are well protected to not get any type of DDoS attack coming in and surprise you. Okay, so let's discuss a bit about the problem itself. What is a DDoS attack? So a distributed denial of service, those are the official term. A denial of service attack is when, a computer or let's say a network device, even, a camera that is connected to the Wi-Fi network, floods an online service trying to make it unavailable for legitimate users. Hence, denial of service from illegitimate users. A DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack, is when multiple computers or other network devices join in to such an attack. And basically now you need to deal not with one attacker, but with an army of attackers. Now, the service itself, as flooded as it gets, depends on the server's capacity of packets and requests. If it gets flooded with more than what it can handle, the server may crash and requested content may get corrupted or even sometimes wrongly redirected, and the server can freeze. And since DDoS attacks are distributed, they can easily overwhelm a targeted server network or application with a flood of internet traffic. Now, and when a business can provide the service it aims to deliver, this is when it pains the most, right? So, even now with malware attacks, for example, which are not DDoS, this is the main point they aim to, right? Because until now, those malwares were aimed to just break into systems and steal data, right? But now they realize there's not much money in that. So what they do, they prevent from online businesses to operate. How they do that? They are breaking into systems, they change the passwords, or they encrypt the data with specific password. And now if you want to get your data back, you need to pay them in Bitcoin, right? So the real damage is unavailability. When you're unavailable, it means you're paying the most, and now you need to solve it. Now, a few examples of attacking groups we see all the time, such as Killnet, Anonymous Sudan, Fancy Bear, and other kind of attacking groups tries to gain sometimes political achievements, and sometimes money. Very much depends on the event. Amit, I'm sure from your experience as a VP services at MazeBolt, you have some stories to share with us.
Yeah,
Maybe
of
you have
course,
someone.
we follow these markets very, very closely, and to see what's going on. Basically, we see numbers that if I had to think about these numbers a few years back before I was really aware and joined MazeBolt, I would not even imagine. We're talking about thousands of attacks every day, right? So the magnitude of number of attacks in this field is just staggering. Everybody talks about the most famous attacks. Yeah, I'm sure that you're all aware of SAS Airlines, the Scandinavia Airlines that was attacked, the attack on Microsoft that brought Azure services down. This is unimaginable. How can you bring Azure services down? OneDrive, Office, all those services went down due to attacks by anonymous Sudan. Right?
Twice in the same month, by the way. That's
Twice
amazing.
in the same month, right? So we've seen the attack with SAS that took their services down for 3 whole days, disrupting flights, delaying flights, losing luggage. Actually, our own VP of services, Orly, lost her luggage during a flight in this incident, right? So it's a fact, real life every day. Alon, I remember you also had a real life incident with one of those attacks.
Right. Back in 2021, I was in New York City. I was driving in the subway, and at some of the station, you do have reception over there, but I stopped to get messages in my WhatsApp. I usually text in WhatsApp to my friends, and I try to understand if I have maybe a capacity issue of my mobile, if my data package was over. Try to log into Google, try to log into the network. Nothing. I was not even able to call my friends on a regular cell phone line. And then I went out to some coffee shop. I think it was Starbucks or something like that, when they had free Wi-Fi. I logged into the Wi-Fi, immediately connected to the internet, and went to Twitter and saw that bandwidth.com was affected. And bandwidth.com was one of the major ISP and communication provider in the United States and Canada, and they were affecting other providers. So millions of people lost their connectivity online and on cell phone. They could not even call the dear ones, and that caused a real issue. Eventually, they lost a lot of money because of that. Now, the real thing we need to ask here, so listen, obviously, we see organizations invest millions of dollars, I mean, like big, heavy budgets in security, cybersecurity, and specifically in DDoS security. And, you would expect that kind of problem, the DDoS problem, to fade away, because now we have new technologies around, we have new solutions. Everyone can just buy it on terms of how much you pay and what you get from it, especially now with the CDN solutions. And yet, we see a heavy growth in DDoS attacks in the last years. It goes up and growing. And you have to ask yourself, why? Is the technology not sufficient enough? Well, the answer is no. The technology is good. The main problem that we see is not with the technology, but with misconfigurations, or should I say misuse of this technology in the correct way. So this is why basically we decided to go out with this series of webinars to share our experience and educate the people on how and what they should do in order to bring something new inside their organization that will help them adopt a proactive approach or a more proactive approach in cybersecurity and in data security in particular.
By the way, one thing that bugs me about what we see here, if you can go back for a second.
Yeah.
We look at the numbers for 2023 and 24, which are our assessments. We see 15.4. This number was achieved in double quotes back in September. So the rise is huge, especially this year. We can't even predict what's going to happen next year. So the rise in the number of attacks is phenomenal. It's way beyond what was predicted at the beginning of the year. So we really need to open our eyes and see what's going on in this field.
This is completely true, and we need to remember that you can cause a heavily damage very easy with DDoS attacks if your network is not prepared to handle that before it happens, right?
Yeah.
You can achieve much more damage very easily. Good. So let's explore some basic network deployment. As we said in the beginning, this is a typical network deployment that usually we see when we start to work with new organizations. Let's see together what we have here and how each component we can squeeze more to help us with preparing against DDoS attacks. So as you can see, the topology is split into two ways. We have the customer network and we have the internet, right? Obviously, we're going to talk here about the on-premise deployment on the customer, and you can look at it as if this is a data center, right? So at the beginning, at the starting point where traffic comes into your network, this is the edge router. The edge router can sometimes be used to restrict access for non-relevant traffic, okay? Which basically means, for example, let's say that I know that in my network, I have only web servers and I have maybe, I don't know, some email servers, some SIP servers, and maybe some DNS servers, right? So I would expect a specific traffic to log into my network, but let's say FTP traffic, which I don't have in my network, I don't have FTP servers, just for an example, I would not expect that kind of traffic to reach in. So I would like to block that right away on the edge router side if I can, if not, maybe later on the way, as far as I can for my core network, because I don't want any unnecessary traffic to reach into my network. I want to have a complete visibility, complete control on what I'm allowing to go inside, right? I don't want my server to start look at packets it doesn't need to get and waste its resources, its CPU, its RAM, its bandwidth sometimes, right? We just don't want it. And now in this deployment, by the way, we're talking only about on-premise deployment. We are not talking about any cloud-based deployment. Okay, so we'll talk about that later on. The next point we see in the network is the dedicated DDoS mitigation device. This is by the way, vendor agnostic, right? We have multiple vendors that can use. This is the main DDoS mitigation point inside our network. Basically, it should protect the core network components and the entire network from known DDoS attacks, right? So that can be a physical server or a virtual machine. It can use protections based on traffic rate thresholds, challenges, whether those TCP-based challenges or web-based challenges, TCP state tracking, and even sometimes signatures-based protections, okay? I mentioned earlier TCP-based challenges, so those kind of like SYN cookies challenges, TCP reset challenges. We can do a lot of interesting stuff. Each vendor has its own way of using that. Go ahead and read the manual, or just send us a question. We'll let you know what you need to do. And this DDoS mitigation device basically also have today some artificial intelligence and also machine learning capabilities. This means that this device learns what is the normal traffic inside the network, and once it notices some kind of a change, it starts to inspect the traffic, understand if this change is malicious or not, and if it is, it creates some kind of a blocking rule or a signature-based rule on the fly to prevent it from causing any damages. In some rare conditions, you would also see rate limiting and geo-blocking protections. And I want to say something about that. Geo-blocking protections basically means you are blocking users from a specific location to access to your network. And although in some cases that can be fine, in many cases that can cause a false positive, which means you are blocking legitimate users. And you want to avoid that as much as possible. And additionally, if someone is attacking you with spoofed addresses, you can mistakenly think that this IP address needs to be blocked from that area, and this is why you're blocking real users. So try to avoid that as much as possible. It's not best practice to use geolocation. I would say very carefully, if you're going to use it only in terms of response, right? Only if right now you're under a real attack and you need to defend your server from going down. Yeah, so it's better for you to block it in a geolocation instead of allowing a service to go down. Same goes for the rate limiting mitigation type, right? The rate limiting, what basically it means, let's say that I'm setting a rate limit of not more than 1,000 connections to my server, right? It basically means that if now you reach that rate of 1,000 connections, 1,000, the connection number 1001 will be blocked. And if that's a legitimate user, and all of the 1,000 connections before that were malicious connections, basically means the attacker achieved its point. You are not available for real users. So try to avoid those two mitigation types. Use them only as a last resort, only if you don't have any other option, and if you're under real attack. One point I want to say about firewalls, okay, and we have a dedicated slide for that, but I will just say this DDoS mitigation device preferably needs to be deployed upstream of the firewall, before the firewall, because it needs to protect the firewalls. Mainly, we are against using the firewall as a DDoS mitigation point, and we'll talk about it later. And the next device we would like to cover is the IPS. So sometimes the IPS is useful for signatures-based protections, okay? It can generate signatures on the fly. It can get also repopulate itself with new signatures that the vendor is publishing. So we see that as a useful tool against, let's say, zero-day attacks or something like that. WAFs, okay? WAFs was mainly designed not to block a DDoS attack, but to protect your web applications from OWASP top 10 attacks, such as SQL injections, cross-site scripting, command injection, stuff like that. But we see in the last years that the DDoS attacks are becoming more and more sophisticated. We see hackers are creating tools that can bypass legacy mitigation services and production and products. And we see that the WAF, in many cases, organizations are using that as a bot detection tool. We actually had experience with multiple customers that was their answer for a very sophisticated bot attack. So yes, we do understand that in these days, WAF is part of the overall DDoS mitigation plan. Sometimes even load balancer in some cases when they have like a anti-DDoS or WAF models, but as a load balancer, I would not consider that as a DDoS mitigation tool. I can share a case, Amit, where I was sent to a big financial organization for a few days to help them to overcome a DDoS attack, a very brutal DDoS attack that brought down many services, and they didn't know what to do. When I came to the organization and worked with the teams, I saw they have like the state-of-the-art solutions. They had a scribing center, they had a CDN, they had multiple dedicated DDoS mitigation devices, which were not in good use. They also had WAFs. And then we tracked the traffic and we saw it was a very simple HTTP flood that brought down the entire organization. And when I asked them, okay, let's use challenge-based mitigation. Let's use even the WAF, if you can, for bot detection. They told me, listen, we are afraid to use it because at some point it causes a false positive, and since then we are not using that. So we pick up the phone, talk with the vendor, got their team inside, worked together to compose the specific rule in the WAF, and eventually we were able to stop the attack already on the cloud-based mitigation. We started with the on-premise and then went to the cloud. So the main message that I have on that is that, first of all, you have the capabilities, you have the technology, you just need to use it correctly. On the other hand, you always need to test your existing DDoS mitigation that you have. Always needs to test, because this was only one example of a simple HTTP flood, right? You can easily test it and see where it was dropping and where it was not dropping, and fix your mitigation accordingly.
It's very important to emphasize that a WAF is a kind of a last stop. You don't want to reach big volumetric or any type of big attack to the WAF, right? The WAF is there to stop the most sophisticated attacks and you don't want to be in a situation, but beside the example Alon talked about, we've seen multiple customers, when the attack reach all the way to the WAF, even if the customer has multiple WAFs, they can go down from the attack themselves, right?
Correct.
So they are there only for very sophisticated attacks. You definitely do not want this to be your only protection. It's a very bad practice to use the WAF as your only DDoS protection.
That is correct. Use it only for bot detection mechanism, I would say at this point, and maybe some challenges ways, but definitely try to avoid using the WAF as a DDoS tool. It's not designed for that. But we are talking here about squeezing what we have, right? So we try to squeeze that. So the on-premise mitigation. So basically, we talked about the edge router. We talked about, you can use your access list tools in order to prevent from unwanted traffic to come into your network. We talked about dedicated mitigation device, which is the main mitigation point in your network. You should use all type of protection on it, challenge-based, signature-based, AI, right? We talked about machine learning. Use whatever you can. IPS for signature mostly. Sometimes also IPS used, by the way, for challenges. And WAF, right? WAF for bot detection mechanism if you are not able to block it already before that. Firewalls. Okay, it's a very important slide for me to share with you guys. A firewall was not designed to block DDoS attacks, right? SYN floods and HTTP floods can easily fill up its connection table, resulting in overload on its RAM and eventually in CPU resources and preventing legitimate users to logging if the firewall goes down, right? The firewall is not available anymore and its connection tables full, guess what? Other legitimate users will not be able to access the network, which basically means if an organizational firewall will go down, it will bring down the entire organization with it, resulting in a damaging downtime. Now, you need to think, how much will it cost you, right? How much will it cost you to have, let's say, 1 hour of downtime just because you use your firewall as a DDoS mitigation point? So I'm not sure if I can stress that enough. Stop using your firewall as a DDoS protection tool. There are other much better solutions.
If there is a takeaway about firewalls, we need to understand that the firewall is not only not a DDoS protection, but it's a target for DDoS attacks. And so a lot of attackers try to specifically attack the firewall, and as Alon said, fill up its connection table, and then the firewall is useless, right? And this is the only entry point to your network. So while a firewall is a network security device, it is not 100% a DDoS protection, but a DDoS target. And it's very important to remember.
Right. And you always seems to come across some organization that still thinks they can use the firewall as a DDoS mitigation way until we show them otherwise. So what are the key takeaways from this part of the presentation, of the webinar? So one, try to block the attacks as far as possible from your core network, right? If you're blocking the attacks on the server themselves or on the firewalls, it basically means you're already in a problem, okay? Your network is vulnerable. And if you will face a determined enough DDoS attack, your services will get disrupted and, well, you might face a damaging downtime. The correct way to do this is by first mapping your online services that needs to be exposed to the internet, such as web, SSH, I don't know, SCP, whatever service you use, make sure to map them. So once you have that information, if the security policy at your organization allows it, block any other traffic from reaching your network already at your edge router level. And if possible, even, sometimes at your ISP level. This will significantly decrease the overall load of your dedicated DDoS mitigation device, and also will allow it to allocate more resources to handle a more sophisticated DDoS attacks. It will also decrease the load from your firewalls, IPS, and WAFs from dealing with simple network floods. So protect your firewall from DDoS attacks at any cost. I can't seem to be stressing that enough. I know I'm nagging about it. A disrupted firewall means an entire organization goes down, plain and simple. RFC violation packets, okay? So, for example, let's talk about Christmas attack. What is a Christmas attack? It means the attacker takes a flood of TCP packets, and you see all the TCP flags are on, which basically means, according to the RFC of TCP, this is illegal packet. It should not be even exist. It means that you should not see even one packet like this in your network. If you go now to your network and open Wireshark and sniff the network, if you see those kinds of packets, you're in a problem. It means your ISP is not blocking those packets. It means your scrubbing center is not blocking them. Okay, you need to make sure that those type of traffic not even reaching your network. Okay, so go ahead and test that after this webinar. See what you get over there. And then set the correct security policies on your DDoS mitigation devices, so you can, squeeze the best potential it has. For example, for good, let's talk about a few good DDoS protection plan we used to work out with our customers. When I was back in the days working in emergency response teams. So when we configure DDoS mitigation devices, and let's say you have a class B network, right, /16, don't just enable all protections on the entire network. It doesn't make any sense, for example, to set up a SYN flood protection for UDP-only DNS server, right? And it doesn't make any sense to allow incoming DNS requests into your web servers if the only thing they do is serving web content through a web services. So what is more scalable to do, both in terms of security and performance, is to cut your big network into smaller chunks. For example, when we configure that on our DDoS mitigation devices, for example, from a /16 to a /24 or a /28, or whatever is relevant, and allocate each subnetwork or a chunk to a specific online service, right? So, and I give you an example. Let's say I have web servers and SSH servers for remote access outside of my organization. Each have different needs, right? So my online web servers should not get any SSH packets reaching to them from the internet. And my remote SSH access servers should not answer any web requests, right? So in a matter of configurations, it doesn't make any sense to have a security policy that includes web challenges, such as 302 redirects or JavaScript or CAPTCHA, or whatever I'm using, on my SSH servers. So I would restrict the access already on the ISP or edge router for those servers, for this chunk of network, or even in my firewall, if that makes any sense in your eyes, to not even allow SSH packets to my web servers, and enable the web challenge protections on the DDoS device in a dedicated security policy only for the web servers, right? So you need to be very accurate when you work. You need to map all the services that you have, understand what you need, what you don't need, and then it will make more sense, will make more order inside your network topology, and it will improve your DDoS mitigation performance overall. And of course, each case for its own, but you get the overall idea, right? Work in a very accurate method to avoid any downtime. And last thing that I'm taking as a takeaway from this part of the webinar, test your network DDoS mitigation in an ongoing manner. The fact we set mitigation, we set it correctly once, doesn't mean you are protected. Networks keep changing all the time nowadays. You have all the time new services added. Sometimes you do maintenance work and change some DDoS security policies or change IP addresses and forget to change it back. We need to remember each single public IP address that is not well protected can cause a damaging downtime to an entire organization. Think, for example, on a web server that would change its IP address, and we didn't change the IP address on the DDoS mitigation policy correctly. We forgot about it. Now what do we have? We have a web server that is publicly available on the internet and is listening to a web request, either on port 80 or port 443, doesn't really matter, or any other port, and by default responds and opens a new connection in its connection table for each SYN packet. Now, not even that, it also means that your firewall will accept those connections because the server responds back. So you see where I'm going to here? You can easily get your network flooded with an unneeded, I would say, open ports, open services, or missing configurations. And we saw that multiple times in the past. Misconfigurations can cause a damaging downtime to an entire organization. We want to avoid that at any cost. So do yourself a big favor. Go and test your DDoS protections now. Understand your network topology. Don't wait for the attackers to do it for you.